I signed the papers with a shaking hand. Not because I didn't understand what I was doing, but because I understood too well. It was the worst season of my life. The diagnosis had come fast. Then came the hospital stays, the treatments, the days I couldn't lift my head. My body was failing in ways I couldn't control, and the last thing I wanted was for my son to witness it all up close. I asked my sister for help, not because she was perfect, not because we were close, but because she was the only one who said yes. Just until I get better, I told her. She nodded. Of course it'll be like a sleepover that lasts a little longer. I gave her temporary custody because the court needed something on paper, because paperwork keeps kids out of the system, and I thought blood would keep him close. I packed a small suitcase, his favorite blanket, 3 bedtime books, a picture of the 2 of us at the beach laminated so it wouldn't wear out in his little hands. I kissed him and said I'd be back before he missed me. He was 5. He believed me. I called her 3 days after my final appointment. My body had changed, but it was mine again. I could walk without collapsing, eat without pain, think without a fog. Pressing down on every word I told her. I was ready, not just physically, but fully. I'm cleared. I said I want to bring him home. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to know the answer wasn't going to be yes. He's settled now, she replied. He's got school friends, a rhythm. I didn't ask what rhythm she meant. I knew my son's laugh by heart. I knew the time he liked his cereal. I knew the story he asked for every Thursday night. That rhythm wasn't hers to replace. I drove to her house that Sunday. Not with rage, not with fear. Just a bag of his clothes, a folder of medical clearance papers, and a quiet expectation that family meant return. She didn't let me pass the porch. You can visit, she said, but let's not confuse him. I'm not a visitor. She shrugged. That's what the court papers say now. I had written those papers, signed them, during the worst weeks of my life. Trusted her with the only thing that made me get out of bed. Now she quoted them back like scripture. He calls me mom sometimes, you know. The sentence sat between us like a knife without movement, not twisted, not even raised, just there real, cold, and sharp. I didn't answer. Not then. Because anything I said would have made me smaller in front of someone who had already decided I was replaceable. That night, I unpacked his clothes back into the drawer. But I left the bag open, because I wasn't giving up. I was just learning how long getting your child back might take when the person keeping him uses your worst moments to prove they deserve your best one. The envelope arrived in a stack of mail I almost ignored. I thought it was another medical bill, maybe a follow-up reminder from the clinic, but the sender wasn't a hospital. It was the County Court Family Division. Inside was a petition request to modify temporary guardianship filed by my sister. She listed emotional instability and lack of demonstrated consistency. She claimed that my recovery was incomplete, that routine disruptions would negatively impact the child's well-being. There was a hearing date, and my name was no longer listed as mother. It appeared beneath hers, lower down, farther away. I stared at the page for a long time, not because I didn't understand it, because I understood it too clearly. She hadn't asked me, hadn't called, hadn't even pretended to speak as family before she acted like a plaintiff. When I called her, she answered casually like it was just another Tuesday. I figured this would come up eventually. You're trying to keep him. I'm giving him stability. You gave him stress. You gave him goodbye after goodbye. My chest went still. I gave him to you when I thought you were safe. She didn't reply to that. Maybe because it was true. Or maybe because the truth no longer mattered. I hung up, not in anger, in decision. Because if she was going to treat this like a case, then I would become the clearest version of myself I had ever been. Not for her, not for the judge. For my son who would one day ask how hard I tried, and I wanted to answer that without shame. She wore beige, subtle jewelry, hair tied back in a modest braid that screamed responsibility. The courtroom wasn't full, but every seat felt like a witness. Not just to the case, but to the distance between us measured not in feet, but in years and in everything she'd decided to rewrite. When it was her turn, she stood with both hands on the edge of the podium, clear composed. I took custody at her request. She couldn't manage care during her illness, and she asked me to step in. The judge nodded. And now, he's stable, he's thriving. He calls me Mom sometimes without prompting. I believe it would be damaging to uproot him again. She didn't look at me when she said it. The judge asked a question. Something about intention. And that's when she said it. She gave him up willingly. She understood it might be long-term. There's no record of protest until now. The courtroom didn't react, but I did internally. Because that word willingly was the softest way to weaponize consent. They didn't see the hospital bed, the IV pole, the version of me that couldn't lift a spoon, much less hold a child. They only saw the paper I signed when I had no breath to argue. She had framed necessity as agreement, and I wasn't allowed to interrupt. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I explained the treatment timeline. I presented letters from doctors' records, from social workers, my clean reports from every check-in since. But nothing I said felt louder than her word willingly. It stayed in the room even when she sat down, like perfume someone else sprayed that you can't wash off your skin. But I didn't panic, because truth isn't always what wins the first hour. Sometimes it needs the full 10 rounds. And I was prepared to stay in the ring. We sat on a park bench, the air between us filled with the crunch of his crackers. It was our second visit since the hearing, an hour-supervised, neutral location. Smiles optional. He leaned against my arm. I felt him glance up twice before asking, "Why don't you live where I live?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, because I knew how permanent first answers can feel to children. Because once you say it's complicated, they start to believe they're part of the complication. Do you miss me every day? Yes. Does Auntie say you're coming back? She says a lot of things. He paused, looked at his lap, then said, "Sometimes I wait by the window anyway." It landed gently. He didn't mean it to hurt, but it stayed in my chest like an echo that didn't fade. The hardest part wasn't the questions. It was realizing how carefully he'd saved them, like coins in a jar, waiting for just enough time and quiet to spend one. If I ask her if I can stay with you, will she say no? I couldn't lie. I also couldn't say yes. So I told him the only version of truth he could hold. "You don't have to fix this." He nodded slowly, then leaned closer, resting his cheek on my arm like a child who'd stopped looking for answers just for now. And in that stillness, I decided something. I would never fill his silences with false comfort. Not even if it bought me another hour of peace. He said it while coloring. We were sitting across from each other at a small table in the visitation room, crayons spread out between us, most of them missing wrappers, one snapped clean in half. He was working on a picture of a rocket ship. His tongue stuck out slightly in concentration. Then, as if commenting on the weather, he said, "Auntie says you were tired and needed to rest away from everything." I didn't correct him right away. I let the silence stretch, not to punish him, but to collect myself. Words spoken too fast would only land like denial. She said, "You didn't mean to leave forever, but you forgot how long forever is." I looked at the drawing. 2 stick figures stood beside the rocket. One small, one taller. Neither with a name written yet. "Do you think that's why I was gone?" He shrugged. "Maybe I get tired too." I wanted to say so much that I didn't forget, that I counted every Thursday. That rest was never the reason I left survival was, but I said this instead. There's a difference between being tired and being unwell. When you're tired, you sleep. When you're unwell, sometimes you need help before you can come home. He listened. Not like a child waiting for the next line, but like someone who'd already started asking these things in his head and just needed one adult to stop making it sound like bedtime logic. "Did you miss me the whole time?" "Yes, every day, even the ones I was too sick to speak." He nodded once. Picked up a blue crayon, finished the outline of the rocket, and beneath it, he drew a 3rd stick figure smaller than the others, standing closer to the tall one than before. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like dust and overwashed fabric. I arrived early, not to rehearse, just to breathe. My lawyer met me by the window near the end of the hall. She had soft eyes and a voice that didn't try to comfort. I appreciated that more than I expected. "We won't argue emotion," she said. "We'll argue fitness, facts, documentation." I nodded. Because this time I wasn't here to defend what I felt, I was here to restore what had been taken. My sister saw us when we entered. She blinked, paused, then smiled, the kind that tries to stretch across tension and fails halfway. Her lawyer leaned in. There was whispering, shuffling. I didn't offer a wave, didn't acknowledge the glance she cast over the table. The clerk called my name. I stood steady. This time the judge didn't only hear from her. She couldn't fill the room with polished memory. She couldn't substitute interpretation for record. My lawyer handed over letters. Treatment logs, parental evaluations signed by neutral professionals. Proof that my house was stable. My job secure, my weekly visits consistent. I didn't speak much, but when asked, I answered plainly. I got sick. I got help. Now I'm well. Simple, honest, no performance. The judge didn't smile, but she listened. And more importantly, she didn't look past me, not like the last time. When the hearing ended, nothing was finalized, but the weight in the room had shifted. My sister didn't approach me in the hallway. Her lawyer walked faster than she did, and I walked out without needing to look back. He told me while drawing again, same table, same plastic chairs, same staff member sitting quietly at the corner, pretending not to listen. He didn't look up when he said it. I have a play next week. The crayon in his hand paused over the edge of a tree he hadn't finished shading. It's about a forest. I'm a raccoon. His voice wasn't louder than usual, but there was something deliberate about the way he said it. A space left at the end, like he was giving me room to ask, "Can I come see you perform?" He nodded without looking. I think I'd like that. I didn't ask if she'd let me. I told my lawyer. She filed the request within the hour. The school allowed 2 guests per child. I knew who the other seat was for. I didn't argue. I only asked for one thing, a spot where he could see me when the curtain rose. The night of the play, I arrived 15 minutes early. No makeup, no camera, just a scarf he once gave me, tucked into my coat pocket like a small flag of memory. The gym smelled like juice boxes and construction paper. A banner on the wall read, "Our Forest Friends," in glittered glue. The lights dimmed. The curtain opened. He was in the 3rd row wearing a headband with felt ears. He didn't smile, not at first. He scanned the crowd with the kind of quiet focus only children possess when they're looking for someone specific. Then his eyes landed on me, and he lifted one hand, a small wave, fast and shy. I didn't wave back. I just nodded, slow and certain. It was the kind of moment that doesn't ask for a camera. It asks to be remembered. It began with a voicemail from the school. Not disciplinary, not hostile, just hesitant. "Hi, we've received some concerns from the guardian listed on file. She mentioned tension following the performance last week." There were no specifics, just the word tension, a word vague enough to imply danger, yet soft enough to deny intent. The next day, I noticed my name was no longer included in the group email from Harper's class. I called the office. They blamed a system update. By Friday, the visitation schedule had been adjusted. No call, no explanation. Just fewer hours, fewer days, and more paperwork when I asked why. I didn't confront her. I'd learned enough by now to recognize tactics built on silence. Instead, I documented every shift in routine, every deviation from the agreed arrangement, every message printed and filed. I told my lawyer. She didn't look surprised. It's a slow push out, subtle but calculated. I asked Harper how he felt about the changes. He said he missed Wednesdays, that the new pickup person didn't let him bring his drawing bag, and that Auntie told him court stuff was confusing for little brains. I didn't say anything cruel about her. I didn't need to, because for every door she quietly closed behind my back, I opened another by showing up calmly every time they expected me to disappear. You don't win these battles by raising your voice. You win them by refusing to shrink. It wasn't planned. No one expected the judge to speak directly to him, at least not more than a greeting. But something shifted during the session. Maybe it was the way my sister corrected me mid-sentence, or the way I didn't correct her back. Maybe it was the folder of reports, or the time we'd spent quietly in court, while others filled the air. Whatever it was, the judge looked at my son, then paused. "Would you be okay answering a question?" He nodded. She didn't smile, didn't soften her voice. She simply asked, "Where do you feel most like yourself?" There was no hesitation. "With my mom." He said it without looking at either of us, just forward. The room didn't react. No gasps, no sighs. But something landed, and it didn't move. My sister leaned back. Her hands clenched slightly, but she said nothing. Because there's no rebuttal to a truth that simple. I didn't cry. There wasn't anything tragic about the moment. It was honest, uncomplicated, full. And maybe that's what healing sounds like when it finally arrives. Not like applause, but like a sentence that doesn't need to be explained twice. Weeks later, the paperwork came through. Custody returned, visitation reversed, stability restored, but not by force, by presence. I didn't call to gloat, didn't send a message, didn't post about the outcome. I just packed his drawing bag, folded the blanket he'd always loved, and waited outside the school gates like I used to. He ran toward me with the same steps, but his hug lasted longer. That night before bed, he left the door slightly open. "I like when you're here before I sleep." "Me too." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't wait for permission to stay.